Rain hammered the windshield like an endless drum, blurring the highway lights until they bled into one long golden smear. Olivia Carter gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles pale against the black leather. It was past 10 p.m. on I-85, just outside Atlanta, and she'd been awake for nearly 20 hours, finalizing a project, reviewing invoices, keeping her firm alive through another impossible deadline. She told herself she could make it home. Just 20 more minutes through the storm. The wipers struggled to keep pace. Every flash of lightning revealed the slick ribbon of road ahead, curving down through the trees. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. Thomas had texted earlier, still at the gallery. Don't wait up. No, I love you. No, drive safe. Only indifference carved into pixels. She exhaled, shifting her focus back to the road. The tires hissed against the waterlogged asphalt. Then came the faint metallic grind, an unfamiliar noise beneath the hum of rain. She frowned, tapped the brake pedal. It sank too easily. The car didn't slow. She pressed harder. Nothing. The world tilted. Come on, she whispered, heart pounding. The guardrail loomed through the downpour. She jerked the wheel, but the tires had lost grip. The car spun once, twice, lights and rain whirling together in a blur of silver and fear, before slamming sideways into the barrier. Metal screamed, glass shattered, and everything dissolved into silence. When Olivia opened her eyes, she was somewhere else. White ceiling, the antiseptic tang of a hospital. A machine beeped steadily beside her, the only rhythm tethering her to life. Her body felt distant, heavy wrong. She couldn't move, couldn't speak, but she could hear. Footsteps, voices, one she knew too well. Thomas. How long will she be like this? He asked, his tone detached, almost annoyed. Dr. Andrew Whitmore's calm voice answered, It's hard to say. The next few days are critical. There was a pause. Then Thomas said softly, too softly, the insurance policy. Would that still pay out if she doesn't make it? The words sliced through the haze. Insurance. Money. Her pulse stuttered. Andrew's voice turned cautious. That's not something we discuss, Mr. Carter. My job is to keep your wife alive. But Thomas laughed, a low, joyless sound. Sure, just asking. The footsteps faded, and the room fell quiet except for the machines and the rain tapping against the window. Olivia tried to scream, but no sound came. Only a tear slipped down her cheek, sliding into her hairline. She understood now. The crash hadn't been an accident. Outside, thunder rolled over Atlanta, drowning her heartbeat as the monitors blinked on in steady defiance of the man waiting for them to stop. The world around her was a fog of muted sounds and antiseptic air. Machines hummed in patient rhythm. Monitors blinked with mechanical indifference, and beneath it all, the storm outside Atlanta continued to weep against the hospital windows. Olivia Carter floated somewhere between waking and oblivion, her mind aware but trapped inside a motionless body. Every attempt to move felt like shouting through water. No voice, no sound, only silence. Footsteps echoed in the corridor. Two voices followed, one calm and professional, the other sharp, restless. Thomas. Even through the haze of sedation, she knew that tone. She's not responding, is she? He asked. Dr. Andrew Whitmore's voice carried the steady authority of someone accustomed to the fragile line between life and death. Her vitals are improving. There's neurological activity. We just need time. Thomas exhaled, audibly pacing. And if she doesn't wake up? How long do we keep doing this? Machines, tubes, bills piling up for nothing. Andrew paused. We don't talk about patience as nothing, Mr. Carter. She's your wife. For a moment, silence. Then Thomas's voice dropped lower, controlled. Look, I'm not saying we do anything unethical. If there's a way to speed things up, maybe it's for the best. She wouldn't want to live like this. The words cut through the fog like a knife. Speed things up. Olivia's pulse spiked, though her body stayed still. Inside her mind, everything screamed. Andrew's tone hardened. You're asking me to end a life. I won't do that. And I suggest you stop talking before you say something I'm obligated to report. Thomas scoffed. Forget I said anything. Footsteps again, fading this time. The door clicked shut. For several seconds, only the rain and the soft beeping of monitors filled the room. Then Andrew stepped closer. Olivia sensed his presence near her face, the faint rustle of his white coat. "Mrs. Carter," he murmured quietly, almost to himself. "If you can hear me, keep fighting. Don't give him what he wants." Something inside her broke open. A single tear slid from the corner of her eye, tracing a path across her temple. Andrew froze. Their secret collided in that moment, her awareness, his realization. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, masking the truth behind calm professionalism as nurses entered the room. "She's stable," he said evenly. But behind his voice was something new, resolve. Beneath the hum of machines, horror pulsed quietly. Olivia now knew the man she loved had already decided her worth. And Andrew Whitmore, bound by duty yet shaken to his core, had just crossed an invisible line. From doctor to silent guardian. When the hallway finally fell silent and the door clicked shut behind Thomas, Dr. Andrew Whitmore stood motionless for several seconds, listening to the hum of the monitors. The room smelled of antiseptic and rain-soaked air drifting in through a cracked window. He took a breath, then stepped closer to Olivia's bedside. Her face was pale, her lips dry, but her eyes, though half-lidded, held something more than reflex. "Mrs. Carter," he whispered, keeping his tone low. "If you can hear me, blink twice." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, barely perceptible through the tears clinging to her lashes, she blinked once. Then again. Andrew exhaled, quiet relief rippling through the sterile air. "Good," he said softly. "You're still here." He leaned closer, his voice steady but urgent. "I'm going to help you, but you need to trust me. Don't try to move. Just listen." He placed a clipboard gently in her hand and guided her fingers around a pen. "If you can, write." Her grip was weak, the letters uneven and trembling. 2 words appeared across the page. "Don't tell him." Andrew looked at the message, his jaw tightening. "Understood." He folded the paper, slipped it into his pocket, and turned toward the small table near her bed. From his bag, he retrieved a compact digital recorder, the kind used for medical dictations. In Georgia, recording a conversation required only one party's consent. And in this case, that party would be Olivia. He hid the device beneath the monitor shelf, its tiny red light masked by the pulse of the heart rate display. "We'll let him talk," Andrew said under his breath. "He'll tell us everything." Hours later, Thomas returned, the scent of cologne and rain clinging to his jacket. Olivia kept her eyes closed, breathing evenly, her body limp in perfect imitation of unconsciousness. Thomas sighed dramatically. Still the same. Poor Olivia. His phone buzzed, and he tapped to answer, switching to speaker. "Hey, babe." "Yeah, I'm still at the hospital." "No, she's out cold." "Like I told you, brakes don't fail on their own when you know what you're doing." A woman's voice laughed on the other end, sharp and familiar. "You really think they'll believe it was an accident?" That voice. Olivia's heart lurched. She knew it instantly. Vanessa, her assistant, the woman she'd mentored, trusted, promoted. Thomas chuckled. "They already do. By the end of the week, I'll have the payout. Then we can finally start fresh." Andrew, standing just outside the door, heard every word through the monitor feed. Inside, Olivia's tears slipped silently across her cheeks. The truth was no longer a wound, it was evidence. And somewhere deep within her, a small spark began to burn. The will not just to live, but to fight back. By the next morning, The storm had passed, but inside the ICU the air still felt heavy, thick with secrets and the quiet hum of machinery. Dr. Andrew Whitmore stood at the nurse's station, the digital recorder in his pocket pressing against his chest like a heartbeat. He had already copied the file and sent it to a contact within the Atlanta Police Department, Detective Robert Hale, a man he trusted. The evidence was solid, but the wheels of justice turned slowly. When he returned to Olivia's room, she was awake, her eyes filled with quiet fear. He spoke softly, his tone steady but urgent. "The police are aware," he said. "They're reviewing the recording, but we need to be careful. If your husband suspects anything, he might act before they can stop him." Olivia blinked once, then twice, the signal they had agreed upon for yes. Her lips parted, voice still barely a whisper. "Hill, come back." Andrew nodded grimly. "That's why you can't stay here. I'll help you get out, but it has to look official. You'll sign a discharge form against medical advice. It's legal, but once you do, you're on your own record. Understand?" She nodded again, fear and resolve warring in her eyes. By afternoon, he had arranged everything. A nurse on his rotation, someone discreet, helped prepare the paperwork. Olivia signed her name shakily on the discharge AMA form, her fingers trembling. Andrew brought her a change of clothes, dark jeans, a soft sweater, and a long coat to hide the bandages, still wrapped around her ribs. He even found a hat and an old pair of glasses from Lost and Found. When the elevator doors opened to the staff parking level, her heart pounded so hard it hurt. Andrew wheeled her chair into the shadows near his car, helping her climb carefully into the passenger seat. As they pulled onto the highway heading north, Atlanta's skyline faded behind them, towers of glass glinting in the morning sun. Olivia watched the city shrink in the rearview mirror, her reflection pale and fragile, yet alive. For the first time in weeks, she could feel the weight of air in her lungs, the promise of motion beneath her feet. Andrew kept his eyes on the road. "We'll go to my grandmother's place," he said. "It's isolated. She's unconventional, but she knows how to heal people the right way. You'll be safe there." Olivia closed her eyes, exhaustion rolling over her in waves. "Thank you," she murmured. "Don't thank me," he replied quietly. "Just get better." The car climbed higher into the hills as clouds thinned and sunlight broke through. Miles from the city, the air smelled of pine and freedom. For the first time since the crash, Olivia felt the faintest pulse of something she thought she'd lost forever. Hope. The narrow road curved along the ridge, lined with dense pines, still dripping from the earlier rain. By the time Andrew's car reached the end of the gravel drive, the air had cooled, scented with wet earth and smoke from a wood stove. A small cabin came into view, tucked beneath a canopy of maples. Its windows glowed faintly amber against the fading light. An older woman stepped out onto the porch, gray hair tied back, flannel sleeves rolled to the elbow. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, studied them as Andrew opened the passenger door and helped Olivia out. "You didn't say you were bringing company," she said, her southern drawl carrying both suspicion and affection. "Grandma," Andrew began carefully, "this is Olivia Carter. She's recovering from an accident. I thought she could stay here a while." Martha Whitmore's gaze moved to Olivia, who leaned against the car, pale and trembling. For a moment, the older woman said nothing. Then her expression softened. "If she's with you, then she's welcome," she said quietly. "But she'll have to work for her healing. I don't do miracles." Inside, the cabin was warm and simple, stone hearth, shelves filled with jars of dried herbs, the faint scent of eucalyptus and lavender in the air. Andrew carried Olivia to the small bed by the window, where sunlight filtered through gauzy curtains. Martha mixed something steaming in a clay bowl, her movements practiced and slow. "This'll draw the pain out," she said, applying a heat compress to Olivia's leg. You'll curse me before it's over. But pain's just the body remembering it's alive. That night, Olivia barely slept. Every nerve burned. Every breath a reminder of what she'd survived. The next morning, Martha insisted she try sitting up. The effort sent fire through her spine. Olivia screamed, raw, furious, helpless. Martha didn't flinch. She placed a firm hand on Olivia's shoulder and said calmly, "Pain is the sound of life coming back. You want to live, don't you?" Tears streamed down Olivia's face, but she nodded. Martha pressed a mug of herbal infusion into her hands, bitter, earthy, grounding. "Then drink. You'll hurt less tomorrow, and a little more alive each day after." When Andrew left that evening to return to Atlanta for his shifts, Olivia watched him drive away through the trees. For the first time since the crash, she wasn't surrounded by machines or fear. Only quiet, only the steady rhythm of the mountain wind. In that silence, something inside her began to shift. The pain was still there, but beneath it flickered the faintest pulse of strength, a heartbeat finding its way back. The morning mist rolled down the slopes like a living thing, curling around the cabin until the world felt suspended in silver light. Weeks had passed since Olivia arrived, and each dawn began the same way, Martha opening the windows to let in mountain air while the scent of pine and damp soil filled the room. The rhythm of the days became a kind of therapy, measured, deliberate, and painfully slow. The first milestone came quietly. One morning, Martha stood at the foot of the bed and said, "Time to move, sweetheart." Olivia groaned but obeyed. With trembling arms, she pushed herself upright, the muscles in her back screaming in protest. Martha steadied her gently but didn't intervene. "I can't do it for you," she said, "but I'll be here when you fall." And she did fall again and again. On the third week, she managed to stand for 7 seconds before collapsing into Martha's arms. They both laughed, breathless, tears blurring the edges of triumph. When Andrew arrived that weekend, he brought groceries, medical supplies, and a quiet steadiness that filled the small cabin. "You look stronger," he said, setting down his bag. Olivia smiled faintly, gripping the wooden cane Martha had carved for her from a hickory branch. "It's not much," she said, "but it's mine." He stayed through Sunday, watching her take halting steps across the porch. The wind brushed her hair into her face as she concentrated on moving one foot in front of the other. 2 steps, then 3. When she reached the top stair, she looked up at him and grinned for the first time since the crash. "I did it." "You did," he said softly. "That's all you." Later, they sat outside with mugs of tea, the forest glowing amber in the afternoon sun. Olivia's hands still trembled, but she managed to lift her cup without spilling. Small victories had begun to define her days. At night, when the cabin fell silent, she would trace the faint scars on her arms and think about the life she'd left behind. The city skyline, the noise, Thomas's empty promises. Here, surrounded by mist and wind and 2 people who asked nothing from her, she began to feel something she hadn't in months. Her own strength returning. By the end of the 4th week, Olivia no longer measured her progress by what she couldn't do. She measured it by each step she took alone. By every sunrise she managed to greet on her feet. In the stillness of the Blue Ridge morning, the woman who once lay motionless in a hospital bed was learning, piece by piece, how to stand again. The storm came suddenly that night, sweeping down from the ridge with thunder that rattled the cabin windows. Olivia had been reading by the fire when the lights flickered once, then went dark completely. Outside, wind howled through the trees, bending them like shadows in motion. Martha lit a kerosene lamp and set it on the table before heading to bed. "You 2 stay warm," she said. "The power lines here don't like storms." Rain drummed hard against the roof. Andrew checked the generator out back, but it was useless. The old machine hadn't worked in years. When he came back inside, Olivia was sitting on the floor by the hearth, wrapped in a wool blanket, the orange glow of the fire painting her face in soft light. He joined her, pulling up a chair. For a while, neither spoke. The silence was different now, not heavy like it used to be, but calm, almost peaceful. Eventually, Olivia said, quietly, I used to hate storms. Thomas said they made me dramatic. I told him they made me feel alive. Andrew smiled faintly. He sounds like a man who didn't know what to do with something real. She looked at him, surprised by the gentleness behind the words. What about you? You talk like someone who's been through his own storm. He hesitated, staring into the fire. My wife. Claire, he said finally. Quel accident. Years ago. I was the one on call that night. She came in through the ER. I tried to save her. The room went still. Olivia's throat tightened. You couldn't have known, she whispered. Andrew shook his head. Knowing doesn't make it easier. You just learn to keep going because stopping hurts worse. For a long time, they sat together, two souls stitched by quiet understanding. Then she told him about the early years, the tiny apartment above a coffee shop, the nights she slept under her drafting table while building her company, the way success eventually cost her everything that mattered. When she finished, he said softly, You built something from nothing. That's not failure. She smiled, a tired, genuine smile. It doesn't feel like nothing anymore. Outside, the rain eased. The first hint of dawn colored the mist beyond the porch. Olivia rose slowly, leaning on the table, then took a breath and let go of the cane. One step, then another. Olivia, Andrew started, but she shook her head, focused. Her bare feet touched the cool wood floor as she moved forward. By the time she reached the window, she stumbled, and he caught her, steadying her by the shoulders. They both laughed, the sound quiet but real. For the first time, it wasn't just healing, it was remembering how to feel alive again. The days grew longer as spring crept into the mountains. Wildflowers lined the dirt path leading from the cabin to the road. And each morning Olivia walked a little farther than the day before. On one of those walks, she heard the faint clatter of tin cans and the sound of a child humming off-key. Near the fence that marked the edge of Martha's property stood a boy no older than 6, skinny as a reed, his jacket too thin for the lingering chill. He froze when he saw her. Sorry, ma'am, he said quickly, eyes darting to the half-empty grocery bag beside him. Didn't mean to bother nobody. Olivia crouched slowly, wincing at the pull in her side. You're not bothering anyone, she said gently. What's your name? Ethan, he mumbled. His hands were dirty, his cheeks smudged, but his eyes, gray and wary, looked too old for his face. She noticed the way he glanced down the road toward the small house with peeling paint. The front porch sagged beneath a broken swing, and a bottle glinted in the sunlight. Olivia followed his gaze. Does your mom know you're out here? He shrugged. She's sleepin'. She sleeps a lot. Something inside her cracked. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a granola bar. Here, she said, handing it to him. And take this book, too. It was an old copy of Charlotte's Web Martha had kept on the shelf. It's about a girl who saves a pig. You might like it. Ethan hesitated, then smiled, a small, uncertain thing that reached his eyes. Thanks, miss. He tucked the book under his arm and ran down the path toward the house. Later, Olivia stood by the kitchen window, watching smoke drift from the neighbor's chimney. Martha joined her, drying her hands on a towel. He's been coming around more, the older woman said. Olivia nodded. He's just a kid. He shouldn't have to fend for himself. Martha's voice softened. You've got that look again. The one mothers get when their hearts remember what it's like to care for someone smaller than their own pain. Olivia's eyes stung. He needs help. Then help him, Martha said simply. Maybe that's what you're meant for. That evening, Olivia called a quiet number she found in the local directory, Child Protective Services, Boone County. She didn't give her name at first. only the address and concern. Over the next weeks, she filed the paperwork properly, offering to be a foster placement if the boy was removed from his home. When Ethan next came by, he was cleaner, brighter, holding her hand without fear. And as she watched him laugh at one of Martha's old stories, Olivia felt something bloom inside her, a tenderness that no longer hurt to feel. In Atlanta, the city pulsed with its usual rhythm, traffic crawling under gray skies, the scent of wet pavement rising from Peachtree Street. But inside the Georgia Bureau of Investigation headquarters, the air was electric with something else, suspicion finally taking shape. Detective Robert Hale sat behind his cluttered desk, headphones pressed to his ears as the recorded voices filled the silence of his office. Thomas Carter's voice came first, smooth, detached, chillingly casual. Breaks don't just fail when you know what you're doing. Then Vanessa Moore's laugh followed, light and sharp. You really think they'll believe it was an accident? Hale hit pause, removed the headphones, and leaned back in his chair. Jesus, he muttered. The timestamp and hospital metadata matched Dr. Whitmore's report exactly. Olivia Carter hadn't just been unlucky, she'd been targeted. He filed an official motion to reopen the case, now classified as attempted murder and insurance fraud. The crash site on I-85 had long been cleared, but forensic teams returned, scouring every inch of the wrecked sedan that had been stored in impound. Within hours, they found what Hale suspected. Clean tool marks along the brake line. Deliberate incisions, masked by grime. Whoever did it had known cars well enough to make it look like corrosion. Hale walked the evidence down to the lab himself. Match this with the wrench set found in Carter's garage, he told the technician. If we get a residue match, I want it fast. 2 days later, the report came back, full consistency. The same alloy, same pattern of wear. Enough for a warrant. Hale spread the photos across his desk, piecing the timeline together. The policy changed 6 weeks before the crash. The transfer of company shares Thomas had been pushing to access. The late-night withdrawals from their joint account. Each detail painted the same picture, greed dressed as grief. Meanwhile, digital forensics tracked Thomas's phone activity. The call logs revealed daily communication with Vanessa, often during Olivia's hospitalization. One text thread stood out. Once it's done, we'll be free. Hale e halit slowly. You won't be, he murmured. He called Andrew next. Dr. Whitmore. The recording was enough to open the case. We're moving forward, quietly. Does anyone outside the hospital know Olivia's alive? Andrew hesitated. No one. Not yet. Good, Hale said. Let's keep it that way. The element of surprise is all we've got. Back in their penthouse condo, Thomas poured wine for Vanessa, the city lights glinting off the glass. He looked out at the skyline with smug satisfaction. Hard to believe it's been months, he said. They found nothing. She's gone. And the money's finally clearing. Vanessa smiled, running a hand along his arm. To us. But a few miles away, in the sterile hum of the GBI evidence room, the net was already closing. Every word, every transfer, every lie, catalogued, time-stamped, undeniable. They still believed Olivia Carter was dead. And that was exactly what would make their reckoning complete. Months later, Atlanta shimmered beneath a heavy summer haze. The city that once represented everything Olivia had lost now stood as the final step in reclaiming her life. She walked through the doors of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation building flanked by 2 plainclothes officers, her posture straight, her cane left behind in the mountains. The woman reflected in the lobby glass barely resembled the one who'd been wheeled into a hospital room months earlier. Her hair, once cropped short after the accident, now framed her face in soft waves. Her eyes, clear, unflinching, carried a quiet strength that no one could mistake for fear. Detective Hale met her by the elevator, nodding in approval. You ready for this? Olivia took a measured breath. I've been ready since the night he tried to end me. They moved down the corridor toward the interrogation room. Through the glass, Thomas Carter sat across from Hale's partner, his tailored suit rumpled, his hands restless on the table. A pitcher of water sat untouched beside him. His arrogance, the armor he'd worn so easily, was beginning to crack. Hale opened the door, stepping inside first. "Mr. Carter," he said evenly, "there's someone you should see." Thomas frowned, irritation flashing in his eyes. "I already told you everything. This is harassment." He stopped mid-sentence as the door opened again. Olivia stepped into the room. For a heartbeat, the world went still. The hum of fluorescent lights, the shuffle of papers, all of it faded into silence. Thomas's mouth parted, color draining from his face. You're supposed to be dead." Olivia met his gaze without blinking. "You killed the woman you married," she said softly. "What's left is stronger." The words hung in the air, steady as the ticking clock on the wall. Thomas stared at her, disbelief curdling into panic. "This is some kind of setup," he said quickly. "You can't prove." Hale slid a folder across the table. "Actually, we can. Audio recordings, forensic analysis, bank transfers, insurance documents, every word you thought no one would hear." Thomas reached for the folder, his hands trembling. "Vanessa," she said. "Vanessa's already talking," Hale interrupted. "She turned on you the second we showed her the evidence." Olivia stood quietly, watching the man who'd once vowed to protect her unravel piece by piece. There was no satisfaction, only an overwhelming sense of clarity. She'd survived the fire he'd lit, and now she would walk out untouched by its ashes. Thomas slumped back in his chair, eyes hollow. "I never meant for it to go that far," he whispered. Olivia leaned forward, slightly, her voice calm. "You meant every word. You just didn't expect me to hear them." When she left the room, the sun had broken through the clouds outside, scattering light across the floor. For the first time in months, Atlanta didn't feel like a place of endings. It felt like justice finally breathing. The courthouse was packed the morning the trial began. Reporters lined the marble steps outside, cameras flashing as Thomas Carter was led through the doors in handcuffs, his once perfect composure replaced by a hollow defiance. Vanessa Moore followed behind him, head bowed, her designer dress traded for a plain suit that did little to hide the tremor in her hands. Inside, the air buzzed with anticipation. Justice, long delayed, was finally being weighed. Olivia sat in the second row behind the prosecution's table, her posture composed, her expression unreadable. She wore a simple navy dress and no jewelry, her hair pinned back neatly. She wasn't there for spectacle. She was there to witness truth made visible. Andrew sat a few seats away, quietly present, his calm presence grounding her as the proceedings began. The prosecutor laid out the case with deliberate precision. Attempted murder, conspiracy to commit fraud, insurance fraud. The audio recording was entered into evidence, played through the courtroom speakers. Thomas's voice filled the space again, cold, measured, damning. "Breaks don't fail when you know what you're doing." There was an audible shift in the room. The jury looked up from their notes. Even the judge's expression hardened. Vanessa avoided Thomas's gaze as her attorney requested a private conference. Minutes later, the news spread quietly across the room. She had agreed to testify. When Vanessa took the stand, her voice trembled at first, but the words came steadily. She detailed everything: the plan, the insurance documents, the hidden accounts. The way Thomas had promised they'd start over once Olivia was gone. "I didn't think he'd actually do it," she said finally, her voice cracking. "But he did. And when he did, I realized what kind of man he was." Thomas erupted from his chair. "You're lying. You were part of it." The judge's gavel struck hard. "Mr. Carter, sit down or be removed." Olivia didn't flinch. She simply watched, her eyes calm, her breathing even. There was no hatred left in her, only a deep, steady silence. When the verdict came days later, the courtroom felt smaller somehow. Guilty on all counts. Thomas stared ahead, stunned, as the bailiff placed cuffs on his wrists. Vanessa wept quietly, her deal reducing her sentence but not her guilt. Olivia stood as the judge dismissed the court. For a long moment, she looked at the man who had once held her life in his hands. There was no victory in her gaze, only the stillness of someone who had already reclaimed far more than he could ever take. Outside, sunlight spilled across the courthouse steps. Andrew joined her there, and she exhaled slowly, the city air no longer feeling heavy. Justice had been done. Not loudly, not cruelly, but in the quiet way truth always wins. Summer returned to the mountains with a gentleness that felt earned. The air carried the scent of wild magnolias, and the hills shimmered under soft morning light. Months had passed since the verdict, and the world that once broke Olivia Carter now felt rebuilt, rooted in peace, not pain. On the porch of Martha Whitmore's cabin, a boy sat cross-legged, tracing lines in a coloring book. Ethan had grown taller, his laughter no longer hesitant, but bright and free. Olivia stepped outside, a folder in her hands, her smile trembling with emotion. "It's official," she said softly. "You're home for good." Ethan looked up, wide-eyed. "You mean forever?" She knelt, wrapping her arms around him. "Forever," she whispered. "No more waiting, no more wondering." From the garden, Martha watched with quiet satisfaction, her weathered hands still in the soil. "Told you, girl," she called out with a grin. "You were meant to be someone's mother again." That afternoon, the small clearing behind the cabin transformed into a makeshift chapel. Strings of white flowers hung from the magnolia branches, and a wooden arch, built by Andrew's hands, stood in the center of the garden. There were no guests, no photographers, no spectacle. Only Martha, Ethan, and the wind carrying the hum of cicadas through the trees. When Olivia walked down the short path, sunlight caught the lace of her dress, scattering patterns of gold across her skin. Andrew waited beneath the arch, dressed simply, his expression filled with a reverence that words couldn't match. Martha held the ceremony herself, her voice warm and steady. "Life's generous that way," she said. "It gives us second chances when we're brave enough to take them." Olivia's vows were quiet but sure. "I've lived through endings," she said, her eyes glistening. "Now I choose beginnings, every day with you." Andrew took her hand, his thumb brushing the small scar on her wrist, the last mark of what she had survived. "You taught me," he said softly, "that healing isn't about forgetting. It's about building something beautiful on the ruins." When they kissed, the magnolias stirred, releasing a shower of white petals that fell like blessings. Ethan clapped his hands, laughing, and Martha wiped a tear discreetly before turning back to her garden. Weeks later, Olivia stood in the converted barn that now bore a new sign above its door, the Whitmore Foundation. Inside, volunteers prepared care packages and therapy materials for women recovering from betrayal and abuse. The space smelled of cedar and lavender, the walls lined with sketches of her old design work, a reminder of where she began and what she'd chosen to build instead. As the sun dipped behind the Blue Ridge peaks, Olivia stood at the window, Ethan chasing fireflies in the yard, and Drew working nearby. For the first time in years, her life no longer felt divided between what was lost and what was possible. It had become whole again, and in that still, golden hour, rebirth wasn't just a word, it was her every breath. A year later, the mountains were quiet again, dressed in the soft hues of early autumn. Mist curled between the trees like breath, the world still and unhurried. Inside the cabin, the old grandfather clock ticked steadily, a heartbeat against the silence. Martha Whitmore had passed in her sleep 3 nights earlier, her hands folded neatly, the faintest smile resting on her face. Olivia sat at the kitchen table, the morning light catching the edges of an envelope sealed in Martha's familiar handwriting. She opened it carefully, her fingers trembling as the scent of dried lavender drifted out. "My dear girl," the letter began, "you were never broken. You were simply waiting to bloom again. The world tried to tell you that pain means ruin, but it doesn't. It means roots. You found yours here. And when you stand tall again, remember, storms don't come to end us. They come to remind us how to begin." Tears welled in Olivia's eyes, but they weren't heavy. They felt clean, quiet, grateful. She pressed the letter to her chest, then looked out the window where the garden still thrived, magnolias blooming even as the season changed. By the porch, Andrew rocked gently in a wooden chair, a mug of coffee in one hand and a baby cradled in the other. Beside him, Ethan sat cross-legged, carefully holding his new little sister's hand. "She smiled at me," he whispered, grinning up at Olivia as she stepped outside. "She already knows who her brother is," Olivia said, smiling softly. The twins, 2 small bundles wrapped in cream blankets, cooed in unison, their sounds mixing with the distant hum of cicadas. Olivia leaned against the porch railing, the cool air brushing her skin as she took in the view, the rising fog, the glint of morning light breaking over the peaks, the life that had grown quietly from loss. Andrew reached for her free hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "She'd be proud of you," he said. Olivia looked toward the magnolia tree, where Martha's favorite chair now sat empty, bathed in gold. She already was. For a long moment, no one spoke. The mountains breathed. The world felt full, and the silence was no longer something to fear. It was peace, earned and alive. As the sun broke fully over the ridge, Olivia smiled, her voice barely above a whisper. "Some storms don't destroy you," she said, watching the light spill across the valley. "They wash away what never belonged."